Welcome to the Creative Writing Podcast. The theme of this episode is sketching a character. You'll need a pen and paper or the notes app on your phone or a blank screen with a lovely Word document on it. The first few minutes will be a writing warm up. Then I'll talk a little bit about why I chose the topic, why it's interesting for writers, and we'll get to a couple of slightly longer writing exercises. During the writing exercises, I'll talk for every 2 to 5 minutes to give you a chance to concentrate. And then towards the end, I'll give you an opportunity to press pause so you can write for a little bit longer if you like. And then at the end, I'll do a little bit of a roundup and get you to reflect on your writing. So, in a lot of my workshops, I say pick a name and an age when I ask people to create a character, and we'll discover the character as we write about them. And in those cases, I'm inviting you to sneak up on your characters and see how they react. This workshop is a little different to that, and it helps people who prefer a more grounded approach to character before bouncing them through different settings and scenarios. We will still, though, need a name and an age, so you can go ahead and choose any that you like. I'm going to say that Carol is 52. She's going to be my main character for the day. So let's start them with a very fast warm up just to get our creative brains going. Place your character in a busy public space that they are going to take a bite of food that they have never tasted before. The result of that is that they absolutely hate it. They despise the food that they've just put into their mouth. I'd like you to write what they do next. And it can be as polite or disgusting as you desire. And if you haven't got going with that yet, maybe try thinking in the purely physical realm. Is this a character who's wearing a lot of makeup, or perhaps they have facial hair? Maybe we can describe their exact mouth and teeth and face. If you are enjoying your writing, then ignore me. But if not, you could increase the pressure on this character by having someone ask them a question. So they have their mouth full of this stuff and then they're asked a direct question which they have to answer. And if you'd like to, you can spend the last minute of this writing exercise thinking about what might happen if they were offered some more. So if it was a disgusting mince pie, what happens if they are offered a whole other mince pie completely for free, offered with, love and generosity? What will they do? And if you'd like a couple more minutes with this because something within it has taken off in your imagination, then just hit pause. Otherwise, begin to bring the current thought or sentence you're on to a close and somewhere that feels intentional. And we'll move on and begin to talk then in a little more detail about character. So, when we're reading a novel, what we want is a character who is compelling and quite gripping and fascinating to read about. And of course, those are enormously broad words. They can do a lot within those concepts, but we do want to be interested in them. Generally, with a fictional character, we'll meet someone at the beginning of a story who's dedicated to a certain attitude about the world. They think they understand the kind of place that they live in and their place in it. They're not very willing to change. They've found some kind of comfort zone, and that makes it extra delicious when they do. And that comfort zone could be Scrooge's miserliness, misery, and isolation, or it could be any romantic heroine who has decided to give up on dating and then, of course, meets the person of her dreams. Or the person might be extremely heroic. They they might exist to give us wish fulfillment. That's a slightly different kind of character. I suppose that their attitude to the world would be that they're terribly optimistic, and they believe in certain ideals that they're willing to fight for. Let's begin thinking about our character from the perspective of the physical self. So, instead of launching you into a longer writing exercise, I'm going to get you to answer these questions just with some quick notes. Um, and for if there are any of these that really don't apply to your work, then obviously just skip them. So have a think about the character who was eating the disgusting food in the warm-up exercise. Are they taller or smaller than the average person? And you could answer that from how they perceive themselves and the reality of who they are. Are they also heavier or lighter than average? By which I'm partly getting at, I think if you're very petite, I know a lot of people who get irritated by their own petiteness. They want to be able to see over people's heads at concerts. Or does your person regard that, they're a very big presence in the room? Perhaps they use that to dominate. So are they heavier or lighter than average? And completely unrelated to the first two questions, are they clumsy or are they very physically coordinated and able? And do they know this about themselves? So I think a lot of quite capable physical people don't regard themselves as capable. They think that they're fairly normal. I'm a very clumsy person, and I know I'm a very clumsy person because I've broken limbs and tripped over myself. So it's an interesting thing to know about your character. What do they regard about their own physicality? And might it diverge from how others see them? So they might see themselves as large and dominating and clumsy, but others might see them as, pretty average size and impressively coordinated. And once we've made some notes on that, let's have a think about three objects that they generally have on them. Most of us don't walk the earth with nothing. We have these little physical extensions of ourselves, which in the modern world might be your keys, but it might also, if you live in an apartment block, be like an access card. It might be your lanyard for work. Or it might be a bow and arrow if you're not writing in the contemporary world. So what three objects do they generally have on them, and where do they keep them? In their pockets? In a bag? If it's their pockets, is it their coat or their trousers? Do they move these things around a lot? Or are they always fairly aware of where they are? Does your main character hate being too hot or too cold? I do think you can divide most of humanity into one of these two groups. So are they someone who gets very frustrated in the heat or very nervous about the cold? They might always be dragging an extra layer or two around with them, or, putting their cardigan down when their mum doesn't want them to. Also, maybe have a think at the moment about whether or not there's a point in your story, if you're working from a story idea, where the heat or the cold might cause a problem for them. This is a very interesting physical irritation. It can really change your attitude, having to make a crucial life decision in 40-degree heat or -10. It changes how you think about things. And then, as a bridge between the physical and more complex self, how do they feel about the dark? It's one of the most ancient fears that we have. And I think a lot of adults carry a fear of the supernatural dark. And of course, some adults unfortunately have to learn, a suspicion of practically what might come out of the dark at you. That can often be based on experience. So there are different ways of feeling about the dark as well. It's not just ghosts and monsters, it can be quite real. Does your character like parties? And I hope you're still just adding keywords, taking notes. Are they excited by parties, or are they secretly trying to work out how to get out of them? Do they get lonely? And you might argue everybody gets lonely eventually. Yes, that's true. But some people really enjoy their solitude. What are they secretly insecure about? I think that's quite a big question, and I think that's why I often like developing my characters through writing about them, because it's when you put them in certain situations that you suddenly realize, oh, they're very insecure about their own physical appearance or the way they come across. What would they say is the worst part of their appearance? And you can go broad here. It might be knobbly knees, it might be their ankles, their bobbly elbows. It might be hair in places they don't want it, or extra long toes. And of course, our face is a part of our appearance that we judge a lot, but it doesn't have to be their face. What is your character proud of? And it might be something they've done or something they own. What is your character proud of? What do they procrastinate over? I always think that's very telling about a person. Most of us can do some things extremely easily, and other things it takes a time to warm up. I know a lot of people who procrastinate about cooking, even though they said they'll cook, they know everyone's hungry. I know other people who can leave the house very easily, and others for whom it never takes less than half an hour. What do they remember from their teenage years? So these are our formative years. When they look back, is there a day or an event or an object or perhaps a soundtrack that they remember from their teenage years? And just before we move on to some more creative writing, what do they really completely lose it over? So they lose their temper or they panic. What do they really lose control over? It might be spiders. It might be people who can get to places on time. We all have things that really outrageously trigger us for very little reason. So now here's another quick writing exercise, and we'll do a bit of reflection after, and then we'll do another bit of writing. I want your character to walk into a busy coffee shop, even if it has nothing to do with the world you're writing them in, even if this is a character who's mostly alone in your work. Bring them into a busy coffee shop and just write a few lines of dialogue. How do they ask for coffee? And if they ask very simply and you can only get one line of it, have the person serving them misunderstand or not hear, so they have to repeat themselves a few times. And now just have a read back over the very few lines of dialogue you'll have written, because I didn't give you long, and have a think. Did your character demand a coffee? Did they plead for a coffee? Did they apologize in any way? Very English trait. Did they start with, sorry, can I have a coffee? Were they offhand to the person serving them? Were they warm and polite? Or perhaps they felt they were warm and polite, but reading it back, you think, oh, this is quite over friendly. Did they stop and compliment the person serving on their Starbucks polo shirt or whatever? Or was the exchange just utterly chaotic? Did you end up writing a character who just couldn't make any decisions or work out how to pay or where the milk was? So the reason I asked you to write first and have a look afterwards is sometimes it can be really useful to see which character traits we can see in the words, as well as deciding the character traits and then trying to write about them. Have a think about whether you learned anything about this character in just watching them in this very simple everyday act of ordering a coffee. Did any traits come up that you weren't expecting? So in your head, this person is very over friendly and chaotic, but actually, when you read it back, you might find that they're quite demanding and short and brusque. And in thinking about the way they relate to the world, Again, does that simple act change the way you think they relate to the world? Particularly if there's anything in the writing that contradicts what you had already decided about them. So, did you have a very short character who ends up ducking to avoid a light hanging down? Or a very rude character who gives in too easily? One of the things that we're trying to do when we create a character, especially in longer work, is keep them consistent. And that's where these character sketches can become quite a good idea. So now we're going to do a longer piece of writing. And at the outset, I'm going to invite you to make a decision. If you have an idea that you are working on or a work in progress, think about a point in your story where your character might have to ask for something. If you don't, if you don't currently have a work in progress, we're going to go back to this counter in the coffee shop. They've got their coffee, they've sat down, everything's fine, and they have to go back and it's busy and they're going to have to ask for something like a spoon or some sugar. So they're asking for something very simple. And before we start writing, let's just have a think. How do they feel about asking? Is it a very easy thing for them to ask? If you're relating this to your own work, is this someone, a small favor from someone they know well? Or is it, are they requesting, a change in worldview from someone they've hardly met? Those are different things. So have a think about who they're asking and whether or not that person has more or less power than them in your story. So it might be a very powerful person or someone they have every right to ask for help. When we start writing, I'd like to ask you to let them, your character, procrastinate a little bit and warm up to the topic. So let them feel their physical self as they build up to asking. Is it too hot or too cold or too dark or too bright for them? And does that affect the way they ask for help? Are they feeling particularly clumsy and awkward or powerful and seductive? And in terms of the physical self, does the person they're asking make them feel very tall or very short or very large or very tiny? So the physicality of the person we're communicating with can sometimes reflect back on us and change how we do things a little bit. So we could allow that to be conscious. So this is a workshop where we've built up an awful lot of notes about what we're going to write next. Just before I let you write, I'll just reiterate what we're going to write about. The character we've been working on is going to ask for something in any situation that you choose. And you can ignore this prompt if you like, but if you're running into any dead ends, have a think about the other character in the scene. What happens if they glance at your main character's body and their eyes settle on a part of your main character's body that they feel particularly insecure about? Whether it's their long toes or their bobbly elbows. So we're going to add that element into your scene of feeling a little bit judged, which can kick off all kinds of reactions. Let's just see where your character goes. And now your character continues to ask for what they want. But because they ate something a while ago that they dislike the taste of, they suddenly get that taste back in their mouth. So they have to try and concentrate on asking for what they want, even though this taste is kind of haunting them. And as always, if you're enjoying your writing, do ignore the prompt. But it might be interesting to consider what might happen if that thing that your character always loses their temper over, loses their composure about really easily. What if that begins to filter into this conversation? It might be something that gets said to them by the character they're asking for help. It might be something that a third character does if a third character comes in. It might also, of course, be a spider in the corner of the room. The challenge here is not to jump quickly to melodrama, panic, and screaming. Whatever it is that your character has to confront, that they would usually wind them up immediately and irrevocably, in this scene, they're going to try their best to manage that emotion, even as the spider breaks from the wall and runs across with the ground in front of them. So see if you can strike a balance between losing their composure and bringing your scene up to, a volume of 13. Now, that last writing prompt is one that might take you quite a while to play out on the page. So if you want to spend a few more minutes doing that, I'd invite you just to hit pause, write for as long as you like, and then come back for a couple of minutes of reflection. If you're running out of writing energy, then bring your current ideas to a close, finish your sentence. And now write yourself a couple of notes as to what you would do if you wanted to carry on writing this scene. And then we'll do a little bit of reflection about your character, but just think about plot and actions and things that might happen for a moment. How might this all play out if you carried on writing? If you don't have time now, record those ideas by just jotting them down. And now, before we finish the session, let's just go back to this idea again that what we're doing today is creating a sketch of a character. Let's interrogate your own writing for evidence of what kind of person that character is. Were there any additional character traits that you could see emerging in this act of asking for help? Perhaps your character is more forthright or more violent than you imagined. Perhaps any notion of meeting someone who could identify their physical insecurities was very, very difficult for them. Or maybe they found it too hard to maintain their composure and they completely lost it. And despite me asking for them not to lose their temper, you might find there are some characters who can't keep their temper at all when things don't go their way. Or maybe you were writing a very timid character who turned out to be a little more confident than you expected. So I think it can be worth reading back all of the work you've done today and just seeing if other character traits appeared on the page in the writing. You might also ask yourself, how did asking for help make this character feel? Did they feel relieved or entitled or belittled? Maybe the exchange made them feel very encouraged that they could ask for help again. Did they get what they wanted? So did they get some sugar, a spoon, agreement to join in the revolution, whatever it is your character was asking for? Did they get it? And it can be worth noting, what does them getting it or not getting it, if you're working on a longer piece, what effect will that have on your plot? In articulating what they truly want, did they lose some power? Perhaps they met with a lot of refusal or resistance, and the people around them were railroading them and trying to take over. Or did they manage to gain a new ally, a new friend, even if it was just briefly in the server at the coffee shop? Asking for help can bring us closer to other people, and when we become closer to those people, how we react to that new closeness, that potentially tells a reader a lot about your character. And again, because character and plot are so intertwined, you might ask yourself, did everyone agree to act in the way that your character wanted them to? Were they completely refused a spoon? Were they told there's no sugar in the whole cafe? Or told that the revolution is, completely unachievable? That's up to you, remember, as the writer, whether or not your character is successful. And then finally, because I always suggest that people do this, if you read back your work and there are any actual words or turns of phrase or beautiful descriptions that have jumped out at you today, then make sure you highlight those or change the font or go around them with a red pen or a nice blue pen. Also, because our brains aren't linear, what you might find is that you've done incredible descriptive writing today, but your character hasn't flourished, because sometimes our brains like to pull that trick on us as well. So it's worth recognizing that you sat down to do a workshop on character. Do you feel you know a little bit more about character, or have you actually completed lots of lovely physical description? And if the character things haven't quite landed for you, you can go back and do all of these writing exercises again, in the knowledge that you're going to attune your brain a little bit more to the character traits and the evidence of them on the page, as well as the beautiful writing. That's it for today, and I will see you for the next episode.